People are up in arms about Nintendo updating its contract. So, what contract do you say? Well, whenever you use a company's website, you buy a device, there's usually terms of service that you agree to. It's usually when you purchase the thing, you use the website. This applies to Nintendo, and people are freaking out, rightfully so. So, Josh and I are lawyers. We do things in intellectual property, and we're here to help you stay legally protected. We took a look at what's going on, and we're going to point out 3 things you have to keep in mind if you happen to be using Nintendo. If that sounds good and you're excited, be sure to subscribe, and let's jump into it.
If you're a fan of Nintendo products or have been waiting for the Switch 2 to come out, then you're almost certainly aware of these changes to the end user license agreement that are active for the Switch 2, which is coming out next month.
Now, guys, for the end user agreement, let's take a look at this really fast. So this is, again, going to be an agreement that you have agreed to in using this Nintendo device. And so it's really important you understand what you have already agreed to. All right, so here we are in the end user license agreement. So starting off, this is in Article 1. And if you scroll down to Section 10, in connection with an update without notice to you, really important words here, without notice to you, the system with an unauthorized modification or an unauthorized system may become unusable. Josh, what does that mean?
Crystal, what everyone's worried about is that you're not going to be able to use your Switch if Nintendo decides that your system is unauthorized or that you've made an unauthorized modification for it. Now, some people in communities that are actively pirating games are freaking out about this, but also people who are just fans of the system are worried that they're not going to be able to use the system the way that they want to.
Okay, so in a worst case scenario, give me an example of how this would impact someone.
So, for example, if you make a modification to the system that Nintendo believes would make it unauthorized, they could permanently make your system unusable.
So, in other words, my Nintendo could be disabled by Nintendo. It's now essentially broken. The second thing we want to point out as far as how Nintendo does their different agreements has to do with how they shield themselves from potential liability. Let's go over to that.
Yeah, Nintendo is notorious for being very restrictive of their intellectual property, particularly fighting against people using their systems in ways they don't want to.
All right, so for example, we're taking a look at the Wii U user agreement. So as far as just how Nintendo does their deal, so in this limitation of liability, we look at this language because if something happens and you need to bring a legal claim, what potentially have you already agreed to? Well, for example, we can look at this on the limitation of liability and let's see what it says. So if you jump down, it goes, in any case, Nintendo's aggregate liability to you in connection with any claims arising out of relating to the network services and the third-party services is limited only to the amount that you've actually paid for the services that are subject to the claim. In other words, in this particular instance, right, because there's all kinds of different agreements that you may be subject to depending on what device you're using, the timing of when you got it, to actually prevent you from getting more than really a few $100s.
Yeah, you could have your system bricked, meaning you can't use it anymore, and you could be out of luck except for the small amount of money that you paid for it.
But obviously, that's not where the story ends. So there's a third thing we wanted to point out. And what is that third thing, Josh?
Well, Crystal, it's unfortunate to say, but people have not been reading these end user license agreements. And we could tell that because of the fact that people are freaking out about it now with the changes to the Switch terms, when these terms have essentially been in there since the agreement for the Wii U. So going back to 2014, we could look at the Wii U end user license agreement, and we can see that it has the sim provision in there that would allow people to render the system permanently unplayable.
All right, so this is where it says it. Any existing or future unauthorized modifications of the hardware or software of your Wii U system or the use of an unauthorized device in connection with your Wii U system will render the system permanently unplayable. Are we essentially saying that if you've pirated something from Nintendo, Nintendo's now retaliatorily taking action against you? Is it just for those people who do something like that?
Well, I think it's safe to say it's at least for those people, given that Nintendo has filed DMCA claims against piracy websites that have their games in the past. They're really serious about protecting that, but it's impossible to say exactly what it covers because it is at Nintendo's discretion. So going back to the Switch language, they say unauthorized modification or unauthorized system, and these are things that Nintendo has determined on their own.
And one of the things we get really concerned about is that when there's a unilateral decision that a company can make, maybe there will be an exception where someone's system gets disabled, right? They didn't do anything wrong. So that's why we get concerned when the language is so broad like this.
Absolutely. If Nintendo has the discretion to decide when your system is unauthorized and they can turn it off, you might be at a loss without any real recourse under their agreement. One other key limitation for Nintendo's end-user license agreements is that you are giving up your rights to sue them. You are signing a binding arbitration clause and a class action waiver that prevent you from bringing individual lawsuits or collective lawsuits to get that contract changed.
Well, and guys, this matters because if, Nintendo does something and causes damages, we go, well, there was a limitation of liability. You can only get so much to begin with. But beyond that, if there's a whole bunch of you that are harmed, you cannot join together to bring a class action lawsuit because you already waived that right. You also can't go through a normal court system. You have to arbitrate, which is a much simpler process. It's not the best when it compares to actually going through real court. So they get you to waive these rights up front, and a lot of people don't even know that they've done that.
Yeah, now as a consumer, we don't have a lot of negotiating power, but it's important to realize what you're actually signing up for and what the company can do when you're signing one of these agreements.
And that's why we take the time to go through these terms of service so you guys know what you're signing. We're Delgado Entertainment Law. If you need help, be sure to contact us. And don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you on the next one.